Constructed in 1892, Maplewood Sanatorium was intended to serve as a modern mental health treatment facility on the outskirts of the small town of Maplewood, Vermont. For decades, the sanatorium operated under the guiding philosophies of its founders, providing humane care through groundbreaking treatments and serene natural surroundings. However, beneath the noble intentions lurked a much darker reality. Historical records and survivor accounts have slowly surfaced over the years, pulling back the curtain on Maplewood's sordid past. Allegations of unethical experimentation, abuse of patients, and a shockingly high mortality rate began to emerge in the latter half of the 20th century. In 1972, a series of macabre discoveries forced authorities to shutter the sanatorium for good. Over a dozen bodies were uncovered throughout the institution's grounds, all bearing signs of horrific mutilation and torture. This shocking development set off a chain of events that would expose the full extent of the sadistic practices that had occurred within Maplewood's walls for decades. For nearly 50 years, the decaying sanatorium sat abandoned atop the wooded hills overlooking Maplewood, slowly becoming an ominous local legend wreathed in ghost stories and tales of the macabre. That is, until a documentary film crew decided to venture inside and uncover the truth once and for all. Working on a tip from a former patient who had escaped Maplewood during its final years of operation, the crew began filming a documentary aimed at finally bringing the sanatorium's gruesome history to light. What they experienced within those derelict, decaying halls, however, was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The crew consisted of 4 people: Sarah, the director and producer, Michael, the lead videographer, Jared, working audio, and Emily, the production assistant. They entered the crumbling ruins of Maplewood on a crisp October morning in 2019, laden with professional filming equipment and determined to finally shed light on the ghastly events that had transpired within those walls. From the outset, an oppressive sense of dread seemed to permeate the sanatorium grounds. Fog hung thick in the air, shrouding the forest of trees in an ominous milky haze. The once immaculate gardens and walkways were now overgrown with tangled vines and underbrush, as if nature itself was reclaiming the very earth upon which such atrocities had been committed. As the crew ventured inside the main building through a gaping hole where the front doors had once stood, the atmosphere took on an even darker tone. The inside was a maze of crumbling hallways, peeling Victorian-era wallpaper, and debris-strewn rooms that had clearly not been occupied in decades. "This place is just brimming with negative energy," Sarah commented uneasily, her breath visibly condensing in the chill air. "You can literally feel the weight of something awful here." Progressing further inside, Michael aimed his camera down a decrepit corridor where the cells for the most severely ill and dangerous patients had apparently been housed. Hundreds of deep gouges marred the metal doors and walls, clearly inflicted by the fingernails of tormented souls who had been locked away and forgotten. "Oh man, this is deeply unsettling," Michael muttered, his voice wavering slightly as he panned the camera across the horrific scene. As they descended into the sublevels, the environment grew even more nightmarish and decrepit. Rusted hospital beds with thick leather restraints lay strewn about, surrounding an array of blood-stained operating tables and trays of sadistic-looking surgical tools. Based on some of the accounts I've read, a lot of patients here weren't just mistreated. They were literally tortured to death, Emily said in a grim tone. And from the looks of this room, that torture was incredibly sadistic and drawn out. Her words hung heavy in the air as the crew filmed the grotesque surroundings in silence, all too aware of the immense suffering that had occurred within those sub-basement chambers. Little did they know, they were about to experience firsthand the malevolent forces that still lingered. As evening began to fall outside, bathing the already gloomy interior in inky darkness, the crew's equipment inexplicably began malfunctioning. Camera feeds cut in and out, microphones emitted harsh bursts of static and interference, and battery levels dropped at an alarming rate. Then the first in a series of bone-chilling events began to unfold. While filming one of the former patient wards, an anguished scream suddenly pierced the air, transmitted through Jared's audio feed and reverberating wildly off the cavernous walls. The hair-raising wail seemed to shift in pitch and resonance unnaturally, almost as if it was phasing between multiple agonizing voices. "What the hell was that?" Jared yelled, his face drained of color as he helplessly adjusted knobs and levels trying to regain control of the distortion. Almost simultaneously, Michael's camera inexplicably died despite having been fully charged. The pitch-black corridors were now illuminated only by the feeble glow of Emily and Sarah's flashlights, which seemed to be dimming by the second. "There's no way these batteries were brand new," Michael insisted, his voice trembling as he repeatedly tried restarting the darkened camera. That's when the malicious presence they had inadvertently disturbed truly revealed itself. In the hallway directly adjacent to where they were standing, the silhouette of a hunched, emaciated figure began manifesting in the darkness. Illuminated only by the wavering flashlight beams, the gaunt, lurching form seemed to flicker in and out of view, its proportions twisting and contorting in ways that defied human anatomy. Sarah let out a sob of sheer terror as she immediately recognized the wretched apparition from her research. It was the entity known as Gashin, named by former patients. A tormented spirit forever warped and disfigured by the depraved experimentation it had endured at the hands of sadistic staff. As the ghastly specter slowly crept toward them, the blinking emergency lights stuttered to life, casting its form in harsh crimson light and revealing its true horror. Gashin's limbs were elongated and twisted at unnatural angles, with arms and legs terminating in wicked bony protrusions rather than hands or feet. Its stretched and sunken face lolled open in a permanent silent scream. The crew barely had time to process the nightmare before the entity unleashed its malice. An invisible shockwave seemed to detonate outward, instantly shattering every light source and battery-powered device with a thunderous roar of imploding glass and plastic. The cavernous hallways plunged into total, impenetrable darkness, lit only by the faintest streaks of pale moonlight filtering in from the high windows. In those fleeting moments of illumination, Gashin's contorted silhouette could be seen flickering rapidly closer and closer. Driven to the limits of fear and panic, the crew turned and ran blindly through the pitch-black corridors, hands desperately outstretched as they tried in vain to find their way toward the exit. The sounds of their pounding footsteps and ragged, terrified breaths were overwhelmed only by the unnatural scratching and slithering that seemed to pursue them through that Stygian void. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling, clawing their way through the suffocating blackness, the crew members at last spilled out into the night air and sprinted away from the crumbling facade of Maplewood Sanatorium. It wasn't until they had cleared the tree line, gasping and retching from both terror and exertion, that they finally allowed themselves to look back. Within the gaping, glassless windows of the uppermost floors, countless disfigured faces now peered outward in the moonlight. Twisted, misshapen visages of the tormented souls trapped within, silently screaming out in eternal anguish in the shadows of their merciless purgatory. Needless to say, the production was abandoned, and the harrowing footage captured during their nightmarish encounter has never seen the light of day. The ill-fated crew has remained haunted to their core, traumatized by the malevolent forces they carelessly disturbed at Maplewood. For the restless, mutilated spirits condemned to walk those halls, however, their torment persists unabated, a hellish limbo from which there is no escape.